Hi everyone, Stjepan here. I'm going to continue covering Zadar Open with a game in which I faced a low-rated opponent who, well, started attacking me when I did not expect it at all. I thought I had a completely winning position and that he misplayed the opening, and all of that is correct, but I still allowed too much counterplay. Okay, so I played d4, played the London system. He played symmetrically with bishop f5, e3, e6, and again I played pawn to c4, accepting bishop b1 lines if he wants to go for that. Instead of that, he played dc4, which is definitely an inferior move, gives white a broad center and a simply better position. dc4 is, I mean, it's playable. It has never been played in high-level games, but it doesn't make too much sense. Okay, knight c3, he played bishop b4, and I just took on c4. So now I have, once I castle, I have e4 ideas. I also have queen b3 or queen a4 ideas, forcing the knight into c6, and he played knight c6 voluntarily, which again, it doesn't make too much sense because now it's very hard to break open my center with c5. And at this point, on a high level, I think white should be winning this position without too much trouble, because the advantages that white has are so apparent and actually easily exploitable. Okay, I continued knight f3, he played knight f6. I castled and he castled. And when I was analyzing this position with my coach, we started here. We started thinking about where I made mistakes that allowed counterplay, and this was the first point at which he criticized my move. I played rook to c1, which isn't a bad move because it puts pressure on c7, develops a piece, but it's perhaps not the most critical move. It allows something that black ended up playing. Instead of rook to c1, after which my opponent played bishop to g4, I could and probably should have played pawn to h3. When I finished my analysis on my own and then with my coach, I checked the game with an engine. So the engine doesn't like h3, and there's a very particular reason for that. The reason is bishop takes knight, pawn takes bishop and knight d5, after which I'm either forced to trade my c-pawn for the b7 pawn, which I don't think is good because the knight ends up on e4, or I simply give up my light squared bishop on d5, or I defend my c3 pawn and give up my dark squared bishop, which is definitely not something I would like to do. So in that respect, rook c1 makes a lot of sense. I didn't play it to prevent knight d5. Of course, in this position, if takes knight d5, I can simply play bishop to g3. That's not the reason why I played it, but it still served the same purpose. That being said, h3 may have been a more prudent move, even if I do trade my c-pawn for the b7 pawn. In any case, my opponent played bishop to g4, and after h3, bishop h5, I thought, well, okay, what do I do here? I should probably just retreat to e2, so I ended up retreating my bishop and conceding some of my development, but my position is still fine. The engine actually thinks white is very close to winning, between +1.5 and +2. I didn't have that feeling. Still, of course, because c5 is impossible, my position was way more pleasant. He played knight e7, maybe preparing c5, which I'd expected, but actually with a different idea of transferring the knight to g6 and starting a kingside attack. This I completely ignored. I continued queen to b3. My opponent played bishop takes and pawn takes, and then b6, which now the engine actually thinks white is winning. This is +3. It may sound hard to believe, but it's a +3 position. Instead of queen b3, if I turn on the engine now, It's not that clear what white should do. Queen b3 seems to be one of the best moves. The other moves, I didn't consider g4 at all. My coach and I were briefly considering knight b5. And if c6 is played, then we were looking at lines with queen to b3 in this position, because this gives up the d6 square. And I couldn't figure it out on my own. In any case, the engine thinks that this is fine for black. Black is actually better here because of knight to d5. But this is an idea we looked at. Queen b3 is a good move. Obviously, attacking the b7 pawn. If the bishop retreats, then I have knight b5 and or queen b7, and he decided to give up the bishop. b6. Now, again, this is a point at which we started discussing reasons for me allowing him too much counterplay. In the game, I played pawn to c4, which I just played it instantly. I didn't think at all. c4, in my mind, had to be the best move because I'm not allowing him to get a knight into d5. And he continued knight e4. Instead of that, bishop h2 seems like a very interesting move. This simply doesn't allow him to do what he did in the game. It still keeps all of my advantages, and if knight d5 is played, I can just chase the knight away. So from a human perspective, I played c4 prophylactically, whereas I should have moved my bishop away prophylactically, and then if he jumps into d5, I can play c4 with tempo anyway. So c4, even though the engine thinks it's a good move, it would have been more prudent to play bishop to h2. Now let me show you what happened. So c4, knight e4, I played rook f to d1. I, of course, didn't want to give up the exchange, so he may have been threatening bishop f3, and knight to d2. Or, yeah, he was threatening that. Now, maybe rook c to d1 was a better idea because of what happened in the game, but I thought this was still fine. He played knight g6. Okay, and now, without giving it too much thought, I retreated my bishop to h2. Obviously, had I retreated the bishop earlier, like I showed you, I would have had g4 here, simply winning a piece. And I played bishop h2 and got into trouble, not in a sense that my position was worse, but I actually had to invest a lot of time to be able to figure everything out, whereas had my bishop been on h2 already, it would have been a clean conversion. And instead of bishop h2, there's a move that I didn't consider at all, which my coach found immediately, and he said, well, why didn't you play g4? And the engine actually gives g4 as plus 3.5. The position is completely winning. Of course, threatening to win a piece, so knight f4 is the only move. ef4 and bishop g6, and the way to continue is queen to e3, after which f5 is the only move, and then knight e5. And this is just game over. I mean, white has so much space, white's king is safe, black's pieces make no sense. I can play d5, I can play c5, it's just a perfect position. In the game though, I played bishop h2, expecting queen h4. No, not queen h4, bishop f3 and queen h4. What he did, I just thought wasn't that good. He played knight h4. But then I sort of started getting scared. My position doesn't seem as good anymore. I thought g4 was the only move, and I played g4. And I saw what he was going to do, and I decided how I was going to be defending. But it wasn't pleasant. So g4. And of course, if he moves the bishop away, then he has nothing. He has to play queen f6. And now, even though I'd calculated everything beforehand, I still had to double, triple, and quadruple check because it's getting to be messy. I should just mention that taking the bishop loses and taking the knight loses, which I saw. So if I take the bishop, then knight f3, bishop f3, queen f3. Once I play queen c2 defending the pawn, he simply plays knight g5 and I can resign. That's it. The game is over. Also, if I play knight h4, then queen takes f2 check, king h1, queen takes e2, and again I can resign. If g h5, then knight f2, king g1, knight h3, and you can see that my position is simply falling apart. So the only move which I had to, again, quadruple check, I spent like 45 minutes in this position, is bishop to f4. And there is only one critical variation. If knight f3, I simply win, because bishop f3, and after bishop g6, I go bishop g2. My position is perfect. So against bishop f4, he has to play g5. And now the line is again forced. Knight takes h4, g takes f4, and knight to f3, threatening to win the bishop. And also threatening to play ef4, queen e3, which would consolidate my position. In this position, he played king h8, which I'd expected. And now, the reason why I spent 45 minutes before bishop f4 was this line. Not gh5, even though I checked it a few times, I think that loses, and the engine confirms that. So after gh5, rook g8, king h2, knight f2, this is simply good for black. I don't think I would have survived this position after knight h3. Not because of that, but because of ef4. And I had to calculate ef4 very precisely. Here is why. So in the game, he played bishop takes g4, which loses, which I saw. The critical line is queen takes f4. And now, gh5, rook g8, king f1, and rook g3 is what I was calculating for a long time, for at least 20 minutes. And I decided to play queen e3. If I take the rook, then after queen g3, I don't think I can get away with anything more than a draw, because if I play queen e3, then queen h3 check, and he can simply repeat the position, and this is a perpetual check. So after rook g3, I play queen e3, queen e3, f e3, rook a to g8, threatening mate, king e1, rook h3, and knight d2 is the critical move. If he takes, then I'm a piece up. So rook g1 check, and knight f1 was what I was calculating. Now, rook e3 should lose for black because I have rook d3. And rook h2, attacking the bishop, can simply be met with bishop to d3. And in this position, the rook is attacked. He probably has to continue knight f2, and then I can continue king to e2 or king to d2. If king d2, then knight e4 is slightly annoying, so king e2 probably should be good enough. Now, if the knight moves away, I can just take the rook, and it should be game over. So that's what I was calculating. After ef4, queen f4 was definitely the critical move. And I calculated everything correctly, so I would have won the game either way had he played queen takes f4. But it would have been much harder. What happened in the game was just easy. Bishop takes g4, h takes g4, queen takes f4, queen e3, I'm a piece up, queen takes g4, king f1, queen h3, king e1, queen h1, bishop f1, and now black can basically resign. It's not that I'm just a piece up, it's that his king is less safe than mine. Once my king gets here, it's just both of my rooks are getting into the game, and he doesn't have anything. He played f5, I played queen f4, rook f6, king e2, rook g8, queen h2, forcing a queen trade, rook h6, queen h1, rook h1, king e3, rook g4, bishop d3, rook h3, rook h1. It's just a clean conversion. Knight g5, takes, rook h1, knight f4, d5. I have a passed pawn, or I don't have a passed pawn, excuse me, but I can force the creation of one because I have rook c1, knight d3, king d3, ed5, cd5, and here he played king to g7. If he doesn't play king g7, if he plays something like rook a4, then I have knight g5, and after king g7 I have knight e6. If he doesn't play king g7, then I take here, and again he can resign. So against cd5 he played king g7, rook c1, rook f4, rook c7 check, king f6, king e2, rook a4, rook c2, h5, and rook d2. And now this is just very forcing, and I'm going to make a queen. I calculated everything correctly. The game ended king e7, d6 check, king d7, knight e5 check, king d8, and now the only thing I have to be careful about is rook e4 check, so f3. And that's it, I'm queening in 3 moves. h4, d7 was the last move of the game. I'm threatening knight f7 check and d8 equals queen. There is no way to prevent it. So yeah, coming back to one of the critical positions in the game, here where he played b6 and I played c4 instantly. Had I played bishop to h2, I just don't see a move for black. He can play c5, but that's just doesn't really do much. I can continue developing and then eventually win some material. Again, c4 wasn't a bad move. It's a very good move, but it allows all of this counterplay. So now you can see why moving my f-rook was problematic in this position, because my knight on f3 is pinned. So I actually had to compromise with bishop f4 and get into this position where calculating everything wasn't easy. Like after ef4, queen f4, that's probably the hardest piece of calculation I had to do during the whole tournament. So yeah, so from bishop f4 I had to calculate this. g5 takes, king h8, ef4. Queen f4, gh5, king g8, rook g8, king f1, rook g3, queen e3, queen e3, f e3. This is what I had to calculate before bishop f4. So that's what, I don't know, 10 moves. So it wasn't easy. So for a game that should have ended with no trouble at all, it got way more complicated. But I won, so I'm happy. I hope you got something from this game. It was instructive and hard for me, especially during my analysis with my coach. So yeah, might be a lesson on how not to get into trouble unnecessarily. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow. Stay tuned for more chess. Bye bye.